You're always late. Why do you always have to be late?
You're listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your hosts, Sonika Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks.
How often does being late or timeliness show up as a source of irritation, frustration, or even major breakdowns in your relationship? That is what we're going to be talking about on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. This is Christian Peterson, and I'll be your host today. Being late or broken agreements around timeliness is indeed a major source of upset and breakdowns in many, many relationships. And today we are going to be talking about various perspectives on this issue. Maybe it's your partner who's the one who's late, or maybe it's you, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your friends, or the person you had set up a date with. Either way, someone gets irritated, someone gets defensive, and often arguments ensue. Being late is among the very top complaints that we hear from all the couples and singles and individuals we talk to. Often we have two people with completely opposing positions on the matter of timeliness and punctuality. To one person, it's pretty clear cut. You know, if you say you're doing something at a certain time, you do it at that time, or maybe you're leaving a little earlier, or you're late. And being late is disrespectful. It's that simple. But to the other person, it's not an important matter. And why are we even making such a big deal out of nothing? Who cares if we're showing up 5 minutes late or 5 minutes early, or at which time at all? As you're about to hear, there are a lot of perspectives around this recurring issue. If you're someone with strong opinions or values around this subject, you might even get a little triggered listening to this episode because it reminds you of how your partner never keeps his or her agreements. Or you might get triggered for other reasons too. But make sure to listen to the entire episode, and towards the end of the episode, we'll also talk about broken agreements and how to clean up broken agreements. In addition to different perspectives on the issue of being late, I'm going to be offering suggestions and tips for how you can deal with this issue as we go along. So let's just dive right in. First, let's talk about agreements. What does it even mean being late? Well, being late implies that there is an agreement to do something or to be somewhere at a certain time. But often, agreements about time are implicit or unspoken and not clear to everyone involved. I might, for example, say to my wife, we have to be at the party at 6 p.m. In my mind, this is actually how my mind works, I've already done the calculations about how long it takes to drive to our party destination, when we need to walk out the door to accomplish that. So to me, it's crystal clear that we need to leave by, say, 5:30 to be there by 6 p.m. And since it's so clear in my head, I simply expect that it'll be clear to my wife as well. So when she's still getting ready at 5:45, when we should have been in the car already, according to my calculations, I'm getting pissed off and I start telling her off or yelling at her because she's late as usual. But that doesn't actually constitute an agreement. If I didn't tell her about my own expectations and calculations, and if she never agreed to leave the house at a certain time, then there was no actual agreement, and she's likely to feel unjustly accused and get pissed off right back at me. So the first tip for you here, practical tip for you to use moving forward around this topic, is that assumptions don't constitute agreements. Get clear with your partner. I'm talking as if this is your partner, but it might as well be your child or your coworker or your friend or your date. Get clear with your partner what constitutes an agreement and what you are both actually explicitly agreeing to. For example, if your partner says, I'll try to be ready by 4, ask them what that means to them. To that person, does it mean they're definitely committing to being ready by 4:00 on the dot? Or does it mean they'll be ready around 4? And what does around 4 mean to that person? Is it between 4 and 4:30 or something else entirely? So the first tip here, practical tip, is to get clear what your agreements are and what you each mean when you agree to them. That by itself will clear up a lot of breakdowns. Now, if indeed there is an agreement and the agreement was broken, that becomes a separate matter, and we'll get to that towards the end of the episode. Now, next thing to consider around this topic of timeliness and being late and punctuality is a matter of context or culture. I, for example, grew up in Denmark in a Protestant, rather conservative family, and from that culture and that family, I took that being on time is an important value and the right thing to do. I took that quite literally as well. You know, if I'll be there at 4 o'clock, if I say I'll be there at 4 o'clock, that means I'll be there at 4:00 or a few minutes early. But I have since I grew up there, I have been in many countries and many cultures where people have a completely different approach to this. In some cultures, just because you say you'll meet at 4, there's no implicit understanding that that means 4:00. Some places, it could even be considered rude to show up at 4:00. You know, in some places, meeting at 4 simply means, you know, we'll get together at some point during the afternoon or evening, and it's not important in any way what certain time it is. And even if you and, say, your partner or your friend, even if you were raised in the very same culture, they still might have grown up in a family that had different habits and traditions around time. You could have grown up in the house next door to your current partner, and you could still have completely different understandings of timeliness and the value that is ascribed to being on time. Now, outside the culture or family we grow up in, this is also a matter of personality. Some people are by personality very specific and precise with details, while some are more general. In neurolinguistic programming, this is known as how we sort information. You could be a specific sorter or a general sorter, for example. And Sonic and I actually make really good different examples. I'm a specific sorter, and she is quite general. When I say we need to be there at 4, I automatically think through all the details. I calculate distances and, speed of travel. I check it against the Google Maps. I make estimates of how minutes are required to shower, dress, brush our teeth. I don't even do this on purpose. It's not like I'm taking out a piece of paper and making all these calculations. I don't do it on purpose like that. It's just that my mind does this. It just does it without prompting. I just do all these calculations in my head. Sonica doesn't think like this at all. She doesn't sort the information in the same fashion. She simply has a general sense of when we'll be there, and it's of no importance whether we arrive at 3:50 or 4:15, for example. Now, and each of these personality traits come with their own strengths and challenges, which is a topic for an entire episode on its own. The point here, though, is to foster some understanding and to realize that no one can say that one way of dealing with the information, one way of processing the information is inherently better or worse. Now, finally, the issue of timeliness is also domain specific according to my personal values. And I'll give you another personal example. If I'm going to, let's just say, a potluck at a friend's house, and they told me it starts at 6 p.m., I take that to mean around 6 o'clock. In that case, it's not important to me if I'm there at 5:45 or at 6:20. In my mind, I make up like an acceptable time range, which could be an hour on either side of 6 o'clock. But in another domain, let's say I've set up a meeting with a prospective client, and this meeting is set for 1 p.m. In that case, I take that to mean I will be there at 1:00, and in 9 times out of 10, I'll be there at 12:50. I'll be early. So in other words, it totally depends on what it's about. It depends on the occasion. If I'm going to my mom's house, I'm fine arriving an hour earlier than she said. But if I'm going to someone's wedding, I would never arrive an hour or two early. So the tip here, the practical tip for you moving forward, is to get clear about your own preferences, your biases, and your values around time. Is it important to you to be on time, and why? Is it always important, or does it depend on the occasion? What makes one occasion different from another occasion? Why is it important to be on the dot timely for a business appointment, but not if you're going to visit one of your friends? Once you get clear about this, make sure you talk it out with your partner, your kids, whoever it is that's you're making appointments with, and make sure that you learn each other's preferences and values. Doing this will also can at least save you from tons of breakdowns and wasted time in breakdowns around time. Now, when we're talking about values and preferences, we also have to talk about makeups. A makeup is a conclusion I make about a certain circumstance. We just call it a makeup. A makeup it's the meaning I ascribe to something that occurs. For example, what do you make up if your partner said they would meet you at 3 o'clock for coffee, but they show up at 3:30? What do you think it means? Do you make up that they are selfish, don't care about you? Do you make up you just can't trust them at all? Do you make up they're scatterbrained, they can't do anything right? Do you make up that something important must have happened to keep them away? Do you make up that they probably stopped on the way to help out old ladies cross the street or offer money or food to a homeless person? What do you make up? And what you make up determines how you feel and how you react, which is also a topic for an entire other podcast episode. Suffice it to say here that it's absolutely crucial to monitor your own makeups, because some makeups result in productive, loving behavior, while some makeups result in unproductive, negative, or even harmful behavior. And I'll give you a quick example here. Let's say my partner and I have been invited to a dinner party and it starts at 7 p.m. According to Google Maps, we have to leave our house at 6:15 to be there at 7. But now it's 6:30 and my partner is still getting ready in the bathroom. First, I make up we won't make it on time. Then I make up that the hosts are going to see us as being rude. Somewhere in my subconscious, a memory gets hauled out about how angry my dad used to get when we ran late. And now I feel really anxious. By 6:40, I'm making up my partner is doing this on purpose to humiliate and aggravate me. Basically, it's like a fuck you to me. I'm making up she doesn't care about me, and I start yelling from the front door where I'm waiting, and what the hell is taking so long back there? By 6:50, I'm making up this evening is going to be a disaster and that we're being completely disrespectful and that it doesn't matter how well I prepare, I'm always being set up by my partner who I make up I simply cannot trust. Ever been in situations like that where it's like as the time ticks on, your mind gets more and more rowdy and you feel more and more anxious and you begin to say things that aren't productive and sometimes you even end up yelling at each other? Yeah. So the practical tip here is to notice and question what you make up about the circumstance at hand. What are you making up that this means? For example, when I question my makeup that my partner is deliberately out to humiliate me personally, I don't actually believe that to be true. When I look at it, getting outside of my anger and I look at that, I don't believe she's trying to humiliate me. When I make up that she's being deliberately disrespectful or that our evening is ruined, I'm just bound to feel angry and I'm likely to say or yell stuff that I'm going to regret later. Now, of course, when you examine your makeups, you'll also find good and positive ones. The good and positive makeups are what constitutes your values in life. For example, I have a general makeup. I really do, that it's good to be on time and that it's possible to make good on other promises I make, whether it's about time or other things. I like those makeups. I appreciate those values, and I'm going to stick to them forever. But it's one thing to have a value about timeliness and to believe, to make up that they send a good signal to the people around me. It's another thing altogether to get bent out of shape and start yelling at people who aren't doing that. Now, another thing to be aware of here is that our makeups tend to turn into rules. More specifically, unenforceable rules. Unenforceable rules are a huge source of disagreement and upset and internal turmoil. How does this work? Well, I have a makeup that people should be on time, let's say. I have a makeup that being on time means being somewhere on the dot to the minute or earlier. I then, over time, I turn this makeup into a rule, sort of a moral edict that in my mind means everyone should be on the dot timely at all times, that it's the morally right thing to do. It's like a rule. When I interact with my partner or someone else who don't abide by those rules, I'm not only personally triggered, but I end up getting morally offended. And the kinds of arguments and breakdowns that come from this are kind of easily imaginable. You've probably been in them yourself. I get on my high horse or my soapbox about where I start spouting the values, the moral truthfulness and universal value of being on time. But that's just my makeup. It doesn't mean everybody abides by those rules. So the practical tip here for you is to not confuse your own makeups and values with rules, and to be very careful not to try and enforce your rules on everyone else, especially if they haven't agreed to that. Now, what happens when we actually do have a spoken agreement and I or someone else breaks this agreement? Notice I'm assuming here that all relevant parties have agreed to this, so it's an agreement like that. But just to keep it simple, let's just say, as an example, let's say I told Sonica I would meet her at the local coffee shop at 4 p.m. so that we would have time for a cup of joe, then go shopping a little bit at the mall before making it to the movies by 6 p.m. Okay? Let's say I show up at 4:15 or at 5 o'clock. In that case, I have broken my agreement. I may or may not have valid reasons and explanations for being late and for breaking my agreement, but I broke the agreement all the same. So, when an agreement was made and someone asks you, did you keep the agreement? That's a yes or no question. When I break an agreement, it has an impact on the people I made the agreement with and myself, and sometimes others as well. For instance, a client of ours that we talked to recently told us that her ex and the father of their daughter routinely makes agreements with the girl and the mom that say he'll pick her up for an outing or a week at his house, but then he doesn't actually do it. He doesn't actually show up to pick her up. Sometimes he calls in advance and says he can't make it. Sometimes he just doesn't say or do anything, and they are left to figure it out. Now, you don't have to be an expert in human psychology to imagine what the impact might be on this girl when her dad says that he will pick her up for being a week with him and he simply doesn't show. I personally would imagine that she feels deeply hurt and angry. I imagine, especially if this happens several times, that she begins to make up that her dad doesn't care about her, that she's not important, that it's better to not hope for anything from your loved ones or from adults or from men because you just end up getting hurt. And there are, of course, impacts on the mom as well. She frequently has to cancel her plans, shuffle, and scramble to change something because she had planned to not have her girl with her, so she had made plans for that. Now all of a sudden she has to change all of that up. And on. We can keep going. The impacts of broken agreements can be significant. When I don't keep my agreements, even if it's seemingly small everyday stuff, like showing up 15 minutes later than I told my wife at the coffee shop, I still run the risk of her beginning to think, hang on a second, if I can't count on him for this small stuff, can I trust him when it really matters? Like when I don't keep my agreements, I'm basically handing her, or whoever it is I'm dealing with, I'm handing her a reason not to trust me. I'm handing her a reason to make up negative conclusions. So the tip here is to be keenly aware of the actual or potential impacts on others and yourself of your broken agreements. I'll just say a word about the impact on myself, because often I know this from coaching many people and from my own life too. When I don't keep an agreement or I blow someone off, I feel terrible. I have a moment, when I realize it, I have like an oh shit moment of this big surge of fear, and I feel shameful, and that's not the kind of person I want to be. And sometimes I end up beating myself up about it, and that is a clear impact on me. So, to reiterate here, the tip here is to be very aware of the actual or potential impacts that your broken agreements have on other people. If you don't know what the impact is, You could start by asking the other people involved. You could say to your partner, for example, when I didn't show up today for our coffee date, how did you feel? Like, what were you thinking about that? And they will tell you the impact. But also beware, they might also not tell you the real impact on them. How often will people say, for example, it doesn't matter, it's all right, no big deal, when it really does matter to them? For example, the girl whose father made an agreement with her to pick her up and just doesn't show up. Will that girl actually tell him how she feels? Or will she say, oh, it's all right, Dad, and then just absorb her feelings internally? I can't be sure, but I know for a fact that the latter happens quite frequently. And this works the other way around too, of course. When your partner or someone else breaks an agreement with you, such as being late, you can share with them what the impact on you is. Tell them how you feel. Just make sure you tell them from your perspective, doing your best to follow, the ground rules of communication and speak in I statements. Say something like, when you said you'd be here at 3 and then you showed up at 3:30, I felt scared and hurt and sad. I was afraid something might have happened to you, and so on. Be careful not to say, you're a liar and I can never trust you, God damn it. At least that's likely to take you somewhere else in the conversation. So the last tip here for this episode is to clean up your broken agreements as quickly and completely as possible. If I see I won't be able to make my 3 o'clock coffee date with my wife, for example, I always call or text her in advance and let her know what's going on and when I'll be there. It's a simple way for me to stay in integrity with my own agreements, so I feel better about it, because now I just have made an adjusted agreement. That's also a simple way to help her relax instead of giving her more reasons to distrust me. Now, to repair one broken agreement can typically be done with a complete apology. We have a process for that too, actually, which could be another whole podcast episode. But the most important parts of repairing a broken agreement and give an apology like that is to acknowledge that you broke the agreement, to own it without explanation and defense, and then to let the other involved person or persons know that you understand the impact it had on them, both practical and emotional. Beyond agreements around time and coffee dates and whatnot, if you've experienced big breaches of trust or broken agreements for a long time, you very well might need support to rebuild trust with your wife, husband, partner, kid, whoever it is that's important to you in life. When you have long-standing a history of broken agreements and distrust, it really does sometimes take some professional expertise to begin to rebuild that. But the good news is most often it absolutely can be rebuilt. And you can reach out to Sonica or myself for that kind of coaching or support, or find someone else where you live that you trust to do that with. Okay, I know I said the last one was the last one, but I have one more thing I wanted to add to this conversation, which is that it's whatever your preferences and values are around time, that's okay. At least this is my belief, that it's okay for each of us, me included, to have whatever values and beliefs and makeups I have around time. I personally go by my yardstick is whether the beliefs and values I have work for me, whether I like them and feel good and in integrity around them, and whether I like what kind of outcomes they produce in my relationships. So, in my book, it's okay, whatever values you have. Now, the tip I want to give you is just from that point of view is it's okay to make clear requests around what you would like around timeliness. For example, I might say to Sonica, hey, I know we're invited to this dinner thing. It starts at 6. Would it work for you that we leave at 5:30? And she might, as with any requests you make of anyone ever, they might say yes or no or something in the middle. And the space in the middle, if it's not a clear yes or a clear no, that's the room for negotiation of any kind. So if I say to Sonica, hey, would it work for you if we walk out the door at 5:30? And Sonica might say, I'd like to be there at around that time too, but I'm not sure I could be ready to walk out the door at 5:30. And I'll say, okay, cool. Instead of, getting pissed off already because I'm imagining that we're going to be late and I'm going to be making up that everybody's going to think we're disrespectful and so on and so forth. Instead of running away with my makeups, I'm just going to negotiate and see what we might work out that could be satisfying. I'm saying, okay, is there anything I can do that would help you, get out the door at 5:30. And I know here some people might say, well, it shouldn't be my job to make her be ready at that time. No, maybe we can debate about that. That it shouldn't be my job to do that. That is another example of an unenforceable rule. And I have found in my life that they don't work so well. So I'd like to give it to myself that we are out the door by 5:30. So I'm just going to go for if there's anything I can contribute to have that result for me. So I might say, hey, is there anything I could do for you that would help you get out the door by 5:30? And she might say, well, I still have to send that email, and then I still have to take the trash out, and I still have to do X, Y, Z. And sometimes it's pretty easy, and I can say, well, cool, how about I send that email for you? Or how about I take the trash out? Or how about I pack the car? Or another thing Sonica and I will often do, if we're going somewhere, say to a potluck where it requires that we bring food, I'll get the food ready and pack it up and put it in the car, because I just know that if you knew how my hairdo is, for example, you would see that it takes me about 5 seconds to get my hair ready, and it takes longer for Sonica. She uses a hair dryer, and so on and so forth. So we just know that it takes a lot longer for her to get ready than it does for me. So I just play with that in a constructive fashion. You could make the request. It's another great way to make a request is to say, hey, let's meet downtown at 3 o'clock. And if you can't make it at 3, would you shoot me a text and let me know? All that just to say that, at least in my book, it's okay, whatever preferences we all have around time, and it's okay to make clean requests about what we would like to see happen. Just don't get bent out of shape if you don't get an immediate yes. At least that would be my recommendation. Just go for negotiating and figuring out a solution that would work for everyone involved. And that's if you knew Sonica and I, you would know in our work, that is always our policy. We firmly believe around everyday things like when we show up for coffee, or bigger things around how we deal with child rearing or our finances or retirement or whatever. We always believe that we can come up with a solution that will work for both of us, and we just go for that until we find such a solution. That's a lot of information. So just to summarize it here, the issue of being late is so common that almost everyone has been on one end or the other of it. And for many, it's just a source of repeated irritation, breakdown, hurt, and broken trust. There are a lot of perspectives to consider around the issue of timeliness, punctuality, and being late or not. The tips that I have been suggesting here, other than reaching out for coaching when you feel that you need some more than you can do on your own, are: 1, get clear what your agreements are and what you each mean when you agree to something. 2, be aware of your own biases, preferences, and values around time. 3, notice and question what you make up about the circumstance at hand. What are you making up that it means when someone is late, for example? 4th, don't confuse your own makeups and values with universal moral rules. Be very careful not to try and enforce your rules on everyone else, particularly if they have different rules. 5th, be aware of the actual or potential impacts on others of your broken agreements, or share with others the impact it has on you when they break their agreements, or in our case here, when they are late to an appointment with you. And lastly, repair any broken agreements as quickly and completely as possible. Like, if you follow these steps and take them on and practice them, I promise you your life will be easier around this issue of timeliness. It's not to say it will fix everything in the snap of your fingers, but it will definitely put you on a better track if you start practicing just like any of these, and preferably all of these. All right, that is all we got for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you got any input for me or for us about this, feel free to shoot us an email or use the contact form on our website at loveworksforyou.com. And we'll just look very forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you on the next episode.
You've been listening to the Dare to Love podcast with your host, Sonica Tinker and Christian Peterson, founders of LoveWorks. If you found this valuable, please hit the share button and share with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or your other favorite hangouts. You can find more about Sonica and Christian's work at loveworksforyou.com.